Good afternoon and welcome to this, the Wallace Correspondence Project's third annual Wallace Lecture. Before I introduce our speaker, I need to make a few announcements. Firstly, George Beccaloni sends his apologies that he can't be here today, so he has asked me, Jan Beccaloni, to stand in for him. So we don't look at that alike, but hopefully I'm not too bad at standing. Second, please could you turn your mobiles off, as this talk is being recorded. Third, in the unlikely event of a fire alarm going off, please make your way to the exit on your left and follow the signs. So it's over there. Finally, please make sure that you leave the building by 6 p.m, as that's when the museum closes.
Or you become an exhibit.
Oh, you've just stolen my line, Richard.
Oh, sorry.
If we've got jar big enough, you'll be going in that. Okay. Apologies in advance if we get interrupted by an announcement telling the public that the museum will be closing, but it was too complicated to have the tannoy turned off in here, so we'll just have to put up with it. Now on to the talk, which will be about, well, less than an hour long. And if you want to talk to Richard about anything that he's speaking about today or anything else, you're welcome to join us at the Hoop and Toy Pub, and we'll be upstairs. And that's on Thurlow Place.
Thurlow Place, right immediately after the lecture. You're invited.
Okay. Our speaker today is Richard Milner, who is an associate in anthropology at the American Museum of Natural History and the director of the Wallace Centenary Celebration Project. This project has been running since 2013, the 100th anniversary of Wallace's death. And so far, Richard and his colleagues have organised important public conferences on Wallace at the American Museum of Natural History, the University of California in Los Angeles, and the North Carolina Museum of Science. He even managed to get David Attenborough to come over to New York and give the keynote talk at the American Museum Conference. Richard's Wallace project, which is funded by the John Templeton Foundation, has also provided funding to the Wallace Correspondence Project here at the NHM and to Charles Smith's important website of Wallace's published writings. Richard is currently co-editing special Wallace issues of Natural History and Skeptic magazines, which will be published later this year. Richard...
And if people will pass around a sheet with their emails and addresses on them, I will send complimentary copies of those special Wallace issues to anyone who wants them.
That's good, yeah.
Get a sheet going around and we'll send them out.
Okay, I'll dig out a sheet of paper in a minute. I think it's going to be a very long sheet, looking at everyone in the audience. So one last little bit. Richard is also a Darwin scholar and has published an excellent book called Darwin's Universe, Evolution from A to Z, or you would pronounce it A to Z, I'd imagine. His other books include The Encyclopedia of Evolution and The Artist Who Saw Through Time, which is a tribute to his boyhood hero, paleo artist Charles R. Knight. To cap it all, Richard is also a performer and has given performances of his one-man musical, Charles Darwin, live and in concert, all over the world, including in the Galapagos Islands and here at the museum. So please join me in welcoming Richard for what I'm sure will be a very enjoyable talk.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to talk today about Wallace, Darwin, and spiritualism, the trial of the spirit medium, Henry Slade, in 1876. The alternate title is Alfred Russel Wallace and the Statue of Limitations. I will explain that later. Yeah, not the statute, the statue, yes. And there's our man Darwin. He had lots of statues, as we will see. And there's our man Wallace in a cartoon made by a friend of mine, Pete Von Charlie, which we were using on the cover of the Skeptic magazine. We're talking about the year 1876. Now, the year was 1876. Let's go there. Never before had the turn of a century been so poised for a revolution in thought. Science was being crowned as the new king of knowledge. Centuries-old beliefs were collapsing with bewildering rapidity. Yet, the 1870s, 80s, and 90s also saw a bold resurgence in the belief in spirits and the afterlife, and the possibility of communicating with the dead. The dramatic conflict between science and spiritualism was played out in a bizarre London courtroom trial in 1876 when a famous American psychic, Dr. Henry Slade, was charged with bilking the gullible public at fraudulent seances. At the Henry Slade trial, which was left out of most of the history books, the two greatest naturalists of the 19th century, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, took opposing sides. That's what I found so intriguing about this, when the supernatural went on trial. It was an exciting time. All the sciences were piling up discoveries, but the overarching presence was that of Charles Darwin and evolution. He was almost deified. Now here's a picture, rarely seen in the West, of a 1920s Darwin statue in the Moscow Darwin Museum. It's an image of a great thinker, a hero of socialist realism, practically a secular god. Now, many statues of Darwin have been created all over the world. He was honored with an image of a Socrates-like Darwin, brooding Darwin, even a giant sand sculpture of Darwin in front of London's Natural History Museum. But his junior partner, Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-discoverer of the theory of evolution by natural selection, never got a statue. Never got a statue. This brilliant naturalist, social thinker, polymath, and biogeographer was honored during his final decades. He died in 1913. He received awards, received dinners, but he never got a statue. In fact, he couldn't even get a decent job to support his family. Darwin's German disciple, Ernst Haeckel, who was also a gifted artist, lectured on evolution in theaters decorated with Gothic displays of skeletons and embryos and stuffed apes. He so adored Darwin that a cartoon showed him offering a halo to his hero upon his death in 1882 as Darwin ascends into the clouds accompanied by his beloved apes. Some statues of his opponents did not fare very well, especially the anti-evolutionist Professor Louis Agassiz of Harvard, who taught a kind of creationism to his zoology students. During an earthquake, his statue at the University of Southern California fell head first off the zoology building. And the president of the college remarked, "I really much preferred him in the abstract than in the concrete." Cell phone off, please. Right on my punchline, too. Now, always happens. Now, this iconic view of Darwin has lately eroded a bit. Here's some students gave him a straitjacket of severe anxiety. And there's one statue of Darwin in England that has had a traffic cone put on his head by a bunch of rowdy students, and I could never figure out whether they were thinking he was a dunce or a wizard with that cone on. I'm not sure which. Of course, in New York subways, with the tubes, we had a poster of Darwin for the Museum of Natural History, together with Curious George the monkey. I don't know who put those two together, but I thought it was kind of brilliant. Now, there's our man, I happened to find this picture in an obscure archive. It had not been seen in 100 years. And I saw it and published it in Scientific American in 1996. And now this picture is everywhere. It's the iconic Darwin picture. It turns out it was the last photo, and it was used on a visiting card, but for some reason it disappeared for 100 years. Now, let's go through the Darwin story very fast, right? Okay. Darwin was interested in beetles when he was a young man. He was the original Beatlemania guy to go to. He sailed on the Beagle all over the world. Wonderful painting by John Collier. And they were in Rio. And when he went in the forest in Brazil, he said, "The mind is a chaos of delight." Wonderful phrase. Darwin and Wallace share this kind of rapture with the natural world. And they passed that rapture on to this man, Sir David Attenborough, their intellectual descendant. He too, at the age of 89 now, has an undiminished astonishment and admiration for the natural world, and like Darwin and Wallace, a passion and a gift for showing it to us armchair naturalists. Now there's Captain Fitzroy, and here's a couple of lines from one of my songs. Savage squaws in gowns and bonnets, spear-toting natives quoting sonnets. And that's what Fitzroy had in mind. He wanted to civilize these people, make them into little Englishmen, so that when sailors were shipwrecked off the coast of South America, which they often were, they could be rescued by the Indians, who would address them in English and perhaps serve them some tea and shepherd's pie. Of course, it did not work out that way. One of the Indians, known as Jemmy Button, who looked something like this, threw off his clothes when he got back there, threw off his civilization, and took a wife. Darwin went back to his island, too. His own home in the English countryside, and settled down to married life. His new wife was his cousin, Emma Wedgwood, heiress to the Wedgwood China fortune. Now, the Wedgwoods were known for two things: their piety and their crockery. And in the case of Emma's brother Hensley, who believed he could speak with departed spirits, their crackpottery as well. So Darwin spent 8 years in his house studying barnacles. That established him as a naturalist of note. After 8 years, Darwin muttered, if you can mutter in a letter, "No man ever hated a barnacle as much as I did, not even a sailor on a slow-moving ship." This is the study in which he wrote his books. And you can go there, you know. It's a museum now. And anybody can just go there. It's wonderful. It's been preserved with the help of some eminent Darwinians, include some who are sitting here today. Well, then one day Darwin gets a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, a man 14 years his junior, working alone in the forests of Malaysia, had a malarial fit in his hammock and came up with exactly the same idea of evolution by natural selection. And he sent his idea, of all people, to Darwin. Darwin, in turn, got involved with his friends, Joseph Hooker, the botanist, Charles Lyell, the geologist. By the way, they were never all in the room when the letter came. This is a Russian artist's conception. Darwin received the letter alone and said, "I never saw a more striking coincidence in all my life." So there's old Wallace, seated in his greenhouse in Dorset near the end of his life. This is a wonderful picture that was given to me by a great-great-grandson of Darwin, Quentin Keynes. Was that right? Was he a great-great-grandson? Yeah. And it was inscribed, "From the grandson of Wallace to the great-grandson of Darwin." Now this picture's everywhere too, I guess. And I met the man, Richard Wallace, a retired mathematics professor. I had one opportunity at this meeting in Germany to talk to him for 2 minutes. And I said to him, "Listen, may I have may I have the audacity to ask you a question that I've always wanted to ask a descendant of Wallace? And he said, sure, what is it? I said, does the Wallace family hold any bad feelings, any animosity towards the Darwin family for their patriarch having been overshadowed so completely by Charles Darwin? And Richard Wallace looked at me with these clear blue eyes and this gray beard. He looked like Wallace himself standing there, because Wallace had this very penetrating, honest, open face. And the man replied to me, grandfather didn't mind. Why should we? Take that as you will. Well, you know the story of their butterfly collecting and so on, and the fabulous book, The Malay Archipelago, that Wallace wrote. Famous, wonderful book that has been continuously in print since it appeared in 1869, and it's still very readable today. I must say, some may disagree with me, that although Darwin is one of my great heroes, I think Wallace was a better writer, particularly in those travel books. Now, let's get to the topic of spiritualism and ghosts. There's an illustration. This is an illustration from a contemporary book on spiritualism, done with a simple double exposure of the photo plate, which was the CGI of its day. Ghostly apparition appearing. And to give you an idea of how close science and spiritualism were, and they've since become completely separated, but here's an article from the New York Sunday Times from 1913, Life After Death Declared Proved by Evolution. This is a wonderful piece I found in an obscure archive. There's a series of skulls, including the discredited Piltdown skull, by the way, as part of the series. Prominent scientists holds that man's ascent from apes means an incessant evolutionary process for humanity, not stopped by the grave, and proves the existence of a supreme being. Now that is the New York Times. When you read it today, bear in mind how it'll look in 100 years. So here is a person looking at a collection of skulls and deciding that it proves the existence of a supreme being. You see what you want to see. Now we get to Thomas Huxley, of course, who is known as Darwin's bulldog. Huxley showed the anatomy of man's place in nature. He showed that humans and apes were much more similar to each other, humans and apes, than either were to monkeys. Now, Huxley hated spiritualists as shams and frauds. And this was a contemporary cartoon of a spirit-rapping seance, and it's called, look at it closely, it's called What Foxes Will Say, Geese and Asses Will Believe. And that was a popular saying at the time, and here it is illustrated. In fact, the poet Browning wrote a famous poem called Sludge the Medium, which was based on the character that I started to tell you about at the beginning, Henry Slade, who had a trial in England at Bow Street Court. I'm staying in a hotel right next to Bow Street Court, which is currently being gutted for other uses. Now, that was the first time that a scientist ever sued a psychic for conducting fraudulent scientific experiments. He had him drawn up at Bow Street as a fraud and an imposter. Nowadays, we don't criminalize psychics. We give them their own television shows and let them write best-selling books. Now, of course, the whole monkey thing was raging at the time. Are we from apes? Are we from monkeys? And of course, I can't resist throwing in a scene that took place at Oxford in 1860 of a debate between Thomas Henry Huxley and Bishop Samuel Wilberforce. Now, Huxley was a young rebel at the time, trying to insert evolution into everything. And finally, the bishop said, perhaps Professor Huxley would care to tell us? Is he descended from an ape on the side of his grandfather or his grandmother? Oh, what an insult to Victorian womanhood. Huxley jumped up and he said, and by the way, there are several versions. No one knows exactly what happened, but there are about 10 different reports of it. But apparently, Huxley said something like this. Ladies and gentlemen, my Lord Bishop, when we speak of descent in biology, we speak in terms of thousands, perhaps millions of years. It would never have occurred to me to bring up a question of one's immediate familial ancestry in such a distinguished gathering as this. But if the question is put to me, would I rather have for an ancestor a venerable grinning ape or a man? A man of great intellect, a man of great oratorical power, a man of great privilege in the church, who uses that power and that privilege and that intellect for the mere purpose of making a mockery out of a serious scientific discussion, well, then I unhesitatingly affirm my preference for the ape. Well, the audience laughed, and they got very excited, and a lady fainted, by the way. Darwin later said, "How durst thou talk to a living bishop in such a fashion? I would as soon have died." Darwin hated public debate. Funny thing was that later on, Huxley and the bishop became so famous for this debate that they repeated it at several different venues. It was like, what is it? Those of you who are old enough to remember, Gordon Liddy and Timothy Leary, the arch enemies, they created a dog and pony show and did it all over the country. And but one day the bishop died, and that was the end of the debates. How did the bishop die? Aha. He was riding a horse. He was visiting a friend in the countryside, and he was riding a horse across a rocky field full of stones. The horse threw him. The bishop went in the air, came down, and split his skull open on a rock. Huxley wrote a letter. "Dear Darwin, I see our friend the bishop has met an end all too fitting for his life. His brains have finally made contact with hard reality." And the result was fatal. Now, around this time, let me tell you the story of the trial, what happened. An American, well, there's Liddy and Timothy Leary, the bishop, Huxley, Henry Slade, an American psychic, spirit medium, came to London. He gave seances for a guinea a seance. It caused quite a stir. Everybody was trying to get Darwin to go to seances. He refused. He said, "I'm a terrible bigot on the subject. I don't believe in it at all." So he sent Huxley. He issued an order. He called it a ukase, an order of the Russian Tsar having the force of law. Go there under a pseudonym and find out what you can. And Huxley went under his middle name, Mr. Henry, and he reported that it was all such nonsense, such transparent trickery. You could just see all the nonsense they were doing. And Darwin said, "Well, just as I thought." Meanwhile, a student of Huxley's named Ray Lancaster, wanting to impress Darwin and Huxley, attended a seance. What the guy did was he would hold a slate under the table and he would ask a question of his dead wife, Allison, and an answer would appear, clicking of a chalk on the slate. And so you'd get the answers to your questions from his dead wife. And a student of Huxley's named Ray Lancaster, You might know his name because a few years later he became director of this very museum. But when he was a student, he thought to impress his teachers, Darwin and Huxley, by exposing the fraud of Henry Slade. And Lancaster snatched the slate away and said, I haven't asked a question yet, and the slate is already full of writing. You are a fraud and an imposter. And he took him to court and prosecuted him for fraud. Let me say another word about this slate. This is the actual slate. It had writing in Greek, and it also had writing in English saying, the spirits are here. And Gracie, listen to your grandfather. Okay. Now, where was I? You are a fraud and an imposter. The slate. I finally found it in Cambridge, in the archive there. They didn't know what it was. I had seen it before in New York, and there was another one there at the American Psychic Society. And I said, listen, I'll be back in a year. I want to take a photograph of this. And I came back a year later, and I said, I want to photograph the slate. And there was a new curator there. The one that showed it to me, it was his pride and joy. Yes, I have the slate. He showed it to me. A year later, I came, and I said, I want to see the slate. No, we don't have it. What do you mean you don't have it? I've looked, and I've looked, Richard. It's disappeared. We don't know what happened to it, but we'll look. So he searched, and then I called him, and he said, Richard, I don't know how to tell you this. We cannot find the slate that we had. And wise-ass Mr. Milner said, what do you mean you can't find it? I thought you were the Psychic Society. He was not amused. Darwin secretly sent 10 pounds, which was a good deal of money in those days, to Lancaster with a note. Quote, I would like to contribute to the cost of the prosecution as I consider this a public benefit. This was in a very obscure place that I found this. And who was the star witness for the defense? Who thought Slade was honest and true? There's Ray Lancaster holding up the slate. There's Henry Slade over in the corner. Who supported Henry Slade as honest and true? Alfred, Russell, Wallace. Now, Alfred thought that this man Slade was just about as honest and as full of integrity as anybody in the field of natural science. That's what he said at the trial. And magicians got up. Maskelyne the magician got up and did the slate tricks and other tricks, ghost tricks. And the audience was wowed. And the judge said, enough of this. This doesn't prove anything. It just proves that you can make something look like it. It doesn't prove that they did it this way. I read all the transcripts in the London Times. Anybody can do that. It was a big deal of the day. Slade was convicted under an old law against fortune tellers, but he never served a day in jail. A sharp lawyer got the verdict set aside on a legal loophole, and Slade fled to Europe, where he enjoyed great success in France and then in Russia, but he kept getting caught and exposed so many times that eventually he died disgraced and in poverty in a cheap rooming house in New York. I published the story of the Slade trial in 1996 in Scientific American. And by the way, I've already showed you this. This is the slate. It had a hinge and a lock on it. They showed it to me because I was also researching Arthur Conan Doyle. And this was donated by a couple of old men in their 90s who were the remnants of the London Psychic Society, and they wanted to give this stuff. And the curator at Cambridge said, Richard, we don't know what this is. Do you know? I said, boy, do I ever. This is the slate of Henry Slade. And it had a letter inserted. This is when I published it. It had a letter inserted into it. It's at the bottom there, by Hensley Wedgwood, Darwin's brother-in-law, saying, in essence, I have watched this and I can guarantee you that there was no trickery. Hensley wanted to be a great scientist. He thought that Darwin and Galton and all the Darwin family was so brilliant, and he wanted to be part of that. And he kept telling Darwin, there's a whole world out there. Just look, it's a new world to discover. Excuse me. And Darwin said, yeah, fine. That was that. There's an interesting postscript about Hensley. In 1880, forgive me, Hensley Wedgwood sent Darwin a long handwritten manuscript, which is still in the archives, a spiritualist synthesis of science and religion. Would Darwin read it and perhaps suggest where it might be published? There's Hensley. In a melancholy mood, Darwin sat down to reply to his cousin. He may have remembered the times Wedgwood had gone to bat for him many years before, many times. He had helped persuade his father and Darwin's father to let him go on the HMS Beagle expedition. And it was to his cousin Hensley that Darwin had once entrusted publication of his theory of natural selection if he were to die. My dear cousin, Darwin wrote, it is indeed a long time since we met, and I suppose if we now did so, we should not know one another, but your former image is perfectly clear to me. However, he refused even to read Hensley's paper, saying, there have been too many such attempts to reconcile Genesis and science. The two cousins, who had once been so close, were now hopelessly estranged over the question of science and the supernatural. That same year, Lancaster, now a professor of zoology, we walked down that very passage today, didn't we? Declined requests to continue ghost busting. The spirit medium, Lancaster wrote in an 1880 letter to the Pall Mall Gazette, the spirit medium is a curious and unsavory specimen of natural history. And if you wish to study him, you must take him unawares. I have done my share of the skunk hunting, let others follow. And he was later appointed director of this museum. Ironically, in 1912, Lancaster, the nemesis of fakers, was completely fooled by the Piltdown Man hoax, one of the most notorious frauds in the history of evolutionary biology. And there's Lancaster in middle age, and there's the group of them gathered around Sir Arthur Keith, showing how he could reconstruct skulls. And there's Darwin's portrait in the background. This is a very famous painting. And there's Lancaster off on the right, 1912. For the next 40 years, scientists accepted the ape-man fragments dug up about 25 miles from Darwin's home at Piltdown. It's near Crowborough, I guess. How likely is that the the of the so-called missing link, the first ancestor of man, would be found 25 miles from Charles Darwin's home? How likely is that? Duh. Come on. Fired with enthusiasm for the Darwin-Wallace theory, Lancaster and the younger generation of evolutionists uncritically embraced this fossil forgery. Huxley, who died in 1895, knew full well that more than a few scientists were prone to develop their own irrationally held beliefs. While young, he had battled English churchmen to establish the scientific approach to unraveling human origins and became a celebrity for doing so. Piltdown Man Free House. I photographed that sign before it disappeared. Old Huxley. There's Huxley cigars. Tom Huxley cigars. That's how famous he was, that they put out cigars. I don't know whether he got paid for it or not, but somebody sent me Tom Huxley cigars. In The Descent of Man, this is a wonderful quote. Oh, there it is in color. In The Descent of Man, Darwin himself had urged a skeptical approach to unconfirmed observations. Darwin believed that accepting flimsy evidence is much more dangerous than accepting incorrect theories. Now, here's the quote from Darwin from Descent of Man. False facts are highly injurious to the progress of science, for they often long endure. But false views, if supported by some evidence, do little harm, as everyone takes a salutary pleasure in proving their falseness. Better to have a false theory than a false piece of evidence. That will throw you off the rails. Now, the whole recent incarnation of the spiritualist thing was invented by a couple of girls called the Fox sisters, Margaret and Kate Fox, in Hydesville, New York. And they conversed with spirits that were rapping, not like Snoop Doggy Dogg rapping, but like this kind of rapping. You'd go in their house, and you would hear all kinds of knocks and raps, and they'd say, "Oh, the spirits are here." Now, Darwin would never think of trying to try it himself. He would never try to mimic the tricks of the trade, but Huxley loved to beat them at their own game. He mastered, get this, Huxley mastered the art of loudly snapping his toes inside his boots. And he would say, "I think the spirits are coming." A little smile there. And now, listen to the kind of detail the great scientist gives you. This is a direct quote from Thomas Huxley. "By dint of patience, perseverance, and practice, the toe snaps may be repeated very rapidly and rendered forte or piano at pleasure. To produce the best effect," said Huxley, "it is advisable to have thin socks and a roomy, hard-soled boot. Moreover," he's so precise, "moreover, it is well to pick out a thin place in the carpet so as to profit by the resonance of the floor. The solution to the mysterious ghost rappings and glowing images of dead relatives hovering in darkened rooms is now no longer baffling to us. Over the years, professional illusionists, Harry Houdini, trapped spirit medium, this was only, 20 years later, the amazing Randy, the great father of exposing frauds and hoaxes, my favorite guys, Penn and Teller, I'm going to see them next week, have taken delight in showing us how the ghostly phenomena was staged. But a much bigger mystery in our story remains unresolved: the enigmatic mind of Alfred Russel Wallace. Even in his own day, he drove his friends and admirers mad, trying to understand how he could reconcile his great scientific brilliance with his mysticism. It somehow seemed even to his contemporaries that there were two Wallaces. Here's a slide by Andrew Berry showing Wallace's line separating the Asian from the Australian fauna, the collection of 125,000 specimens, naming thousands of new species, traveling 14,000 miles across the Malay archipelago in 8 years. There's my map of Wallace's line to show it to you in a simple form. Asian fauna on one side, Australian fauna on the other side. It was not figured out until more than 140 years later that there was a reason for this that was explainable by science, namely the movement of tectonic plates. Animals had evolved in one way on one side, one way on the other side, and those plates kept moving closer together until finally you got to a point where they were separated by a very thin channel of water. This is G.K. Chesterton. It sometimes seemed, even to Wallace's contemporaries, that there were two Wallaces: the Wallace of natural selection and biogeography and the discoverer of Wallace's line, and the Wallace who thought the human mind could not possibly have been produced by natural selection acting alone, but required a boost from what he called the unseen universe of spirit. Books are still being written about how to reconcile the two Wallaces. The author G.K. Chesterton on Wallace's, thank you, darling. The author G.K. Chesterton on Wallace's 81st birthday in 1904 proclaimed him one of the most interesting men of the 19th century because, quote, he was both the founder of a revolution scientific materialist evolution, and a counter-revolution, spiritualistic, theistic evolution. Interestingly, Chesterton chose as the other most interesting person of the 19th century the poet Walt Whitman, who also had no problem living with contradictions. In his poem, Song of Myself, Whitman admitted, "Do I contradict myself? Well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." Wallace could apply himself, there's Walt Whitman. Wallace could apply himself brilliantly to how far scientific method would take him. And it enabled him to unravel puzzles and mysteries that had baffled naturalists for centuries. When Darwin was puzzled about insect mimicry or peacock's tails, he appealed to Wallace, who usually came up with a new angle. "You are the right man to apply to in a difficulty," Darwin told him. So the question remains, how did a man of such brilliance allow himself to be so completely fooled by tricksters like Slade, by con men, by scam artists? And I think I have a clue about the answer. Many people have made suggestions, and I think the first part of it is Wallace's extreme honesty and transparency. He thought they were honest. He was incapable of looking someone in the eye and lying to them. It was not difficult for some of these mediums to do exactly that. They would look you in the eye and they would lie. That was something that was beyond Wallace's comprehension. Naive and trusting, he refused to think the worst of people who spoke like earnest seekers after truth. Wallace was a keen observer. Huxley noted that he could sit in a jungle and observe and record everything that was going on. He trusted his senses and his reason because there was nothing there to deliberately trick him. There was no misdirection. The greatest tool of the magician, the illusionist, the con man, the swindler, to purposely swerve your attention away from what you're supposed to be looking at and distract it to something else. That was the basic principle of tricksters that Wallace never figured on when he was dealing with so-called mediums and psychics. The most profound reason that Wallace was so easily taken in by spiritualistic imposters, of course, was that he had a sincere, deep-seated belief in the world of spirit. He had concluded that Earth is a place where human souls are schooled, improved, and perfected for their next higher life. If mediums or channelers are occasionally caught in trickery and fraud, he argued, that does not disprove the reality of spirit. Similarly, he said, and I love this, he said, the existence of some counterfeit money only proves that lots of real money must exist somewhere, or nobody would bother counterfeiting it. As old age approached for Wallace, he still could not find a way of making money. Teaching jobs were few and far between, and he ended up grading examination papers for students in science classes, a very laborious way for a man of his age and accomplishments to make a living. Darwin thought it was a shame and decided to apply for a government pension for Wallace for his lifelong service to natural history. So Darwin wrote around to his scientific friends, putting names on a petition. And a note came to him, which I have held in my hand, from his friend, the great botanist Joseph Hooker of Kew Gardens, who said, Charles, I can hardly see how I can apply to one's friends in government for a pension for Wallace, for he has been a public and leading spiritualist. Darwin wrote to Huxley, oh, what should I say to that? Huxley replied, just tell him that Wallace's belief about an afterlife are his own personal business. And besides, his beliefs are no worse than the superstitions of the majority of the country. So Darwin wrote that back to Hooker, and Wallace got his pension. But he still didn't get any statues. He was not buried in Westminster Abbey next to Darwin, although he did eventually get a little plaque near Darwin's tomb there. Actually, he wanted to be buried out in the countryside in Dorset, in a grave in a little rural cemetery without any fuss. But it had a most peculiar gravestone on it. It was a huge log of petrified wood jutting straight up into the air. Whose idea that was is not well known, but you can draw your own conclusions. It's still there after 100 years, Wallace's only monument in stone. But Wallace finally did get his statue. And there is, during the Wallace Centenary celebration at this museum, on November 7th, 2013, exactly 100 years after Wallace's death at the age of 93, this is the sculptor, Anthony Smith. The great naturalist filmmaker David Attenborough unveils a new and wonderful statue. Rather than adopting a heroic pose, sculptor Smith chose to depict him as a working field biologist and collector in the Malaysian rainforest, intent on netting the long-sought golden birdwing butterfly that was named after him. That huge, rare butterfly gave Wallace such a thrill when he caught it, and he wrote about this, that he nearly fainted from excitement. In addition, and you can see that, if you haven't seen it, that statue is here, right outside this museum. There it is. Just at that moment when he sees the golden birdwing butterfly, dressed in his field collecting clothes. In addition, that's the butterfly. When you see it, it's like seeing a bird in flight. It's so big. In addition, a long-neglected oil portrait of Wallace was hung near Darwin's statue that year. On the main staircase facing the entrance to the museum, right near Darwin's statue. Looking back to 1882, we see the way it looked when Darwin's 2-ton marble statue was placed there. There's Huxley giving a eulogy for Darwin. And to replace that of Richard Owen, the museum's founder. Darwin ruled that staircase for many years with some absences and returns, and now he is back, and Wallace is back. And here's a crowd of people, of Wallace scholars and enthusiasts, some of whom are right here tonight, who are in this very picture, ascending the staircase to unveil the portrait of Wallace soon after that statue was unveiled. At the same time, his memory was being celebrated in New York, Singapore, and Wales, and thousands of his letters and writings were being preserved and placed online to make his thought and life accessible to future generations. And I must say that our friend George Beccaloni, who was unfortunately not able to be here tonight, but he will be at the after party if you want to meet him. George is the man responsible for the Wallace letters, and he is the man responsible for the Darwin statue, even so much as researching the very costume that's worn in the field by Mr. Wallace. Well, Darwin became melancholy in his last days, though he never regretted having devoted his life to science and accepting the finality of death. Wallace, on the other hand, was cheerful and optimistic to the last. That's a so-called spirit photo. And looked forward to new vistas of adventure and discovery in the spirit world. Both of them, young Darwin, young Wallace, both of them have helped us on the path to discovering who we are. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to the John Templeton Foundation and the North Carolina and the London Natural History Museum. And good night, Alfred Russel Wallace, wherever you are. Thank you very much. I want to add one little bit of a poem that's my favorite, and it has to do with, that's all right, Jen, stay here. What it has to do with the disputes. And there was a poet called Samuel Butler that disputed Darwin, bitter disputes. And when Darwin died, Butler wrote a poem called Immortality. And it goes like this. We shall not argue, saying 'twas thus or thus. Our arguments hold drift. We shall forget. Who's right, who's wrong, 'twill all be one to us. We shall not even know that we have met. Yet meet we shall, and part, and meet again, where dead men meet on lips of living men. And I will close with that. And now we're going to have a couple of surprises. Yes, Jan, or do you want to come on now?
Okay, well, yeah, thank you again, Richard, for such an extremely entertaining and informative talk. I don't think I've laughed that much at anything scientific in a long time. So let's give Richard another round of applause for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just need to put something. Okay, I'm just going to put something on the screen here. And if I get this wrong, I'm in trouble with George. Nearly there, nearly there. Sorry. Gemma, my volunteer who's in the audience, will know that my IT skills are kind of similar to those of a dead slug, so... Thank you. See, that's one reason why I have Gemma as a volunteer. Right, now, this is a special moment, Richard,
yes.
Because as the secretary of the Wallace Memorial Fund,
yes.
I am very delighted to present you with the Fund's Bronze Wallace Medal, which is awarded for outstanding contributions to the public understanding of Alfred Russel Wallace's life and work. And so I would like you, and please don't fall off the stage. I am a first aider, but I'd rather not patch you up. If we can stand there, I'd like the audience to be able to see this wonderful medal that Martin, my other wonderful volunteer, helped to produce. So well done to Martin. I'll just open the box.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Ooh, there we go. And if you'd like to hold that down so that Lance can take some more photos.
Yes, can you see that? Richard,
you are only the third ever recipient of a Wallace Medal.
Yes.
Ooh. And are in good company, as the first two were awarded to Bill Bailey and David Attenborough here in this lecture theatre in 2013 in recognition of their very important contributions to the public understanding of Wallace's life and work, which they made during the anniversary year. So, congratulations, Richard. Well done.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's very kind, and it's not only the best medal I've ever received, it's also the only medal I've ever received.
No statue.
No statue yet. No. Well, words fail me. I'm thrilled and delighted, and I owe the success of the Wallace work to many people. Including Patty Hinsdale and Feely Lee and David Attenborough and Andrew Berry and Errol Fuller. So I accept this on behalf of all my colleagues who worked so hard on the Wallace centenary. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, those of you who have to run off now, you can do that without offending anybody. You can leave right now. The songs are only 3 minutes apiece, so we will have time to do the songs and get out of the museum. So I'm going to attempt to do that now, and I hope you enjoy it. I just have to take a moment to find the music on the iPad, and then we will have it. This is really a wonderful evening for me, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. Darwin's soliloquy. All right, let him be first then. He'll be the most hated and reviled man in all of England. Let him be first. Let him be first. there'll be no celebration. Let him be first. There'll be no adulation. Let him inform the human race that it came down from the trees. And he can tell the bishops they are kin to chimpanzees. Let him be first. I'll offer no resistance. Let him be first. I'll lend him my assistance. They'll hang the man who'd dare deny the stories we were nurtured by in every British home. He will be cursed. So let him. Yes, let him be first. Let him be first. And I will take no action. Let him be first. To claim this vague abstraction, it's nothing but a theory. Any dreamer could conceive, and not a thing a man of any substance will believe. Let him be first. Though I've been sorely tempted, come, do your worst. It seems I've been preempted. My bid for immortality has been a lovely joke on me. I'll have to watch my pretty bubble burst. Forget him. Yes, let him be. Thank you. I'm going to conclude, and we'll save the rest of the songs for another time, much as it hurts me. Well, we'll limit me to one song tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Such a delight to have you all here. Thanks for the medal. This has been a wonderful day in my life, and I hope I shared a little of it with you. Thank you very much.